Let's talk about Storm, baby. Let's talk about her history. Let's talk about all the drama and all the mystery. Let's talk about Storm. Yeah, let's talk about Storm. As you guys can tell, this video is going to be about one of my favorite Marvel characters, Storm. Or Aurora Monroe. God, I'm so bad at pronunciation. Whatever. The point is that this is one of my favorite characters. Storm was the girl that brought me into comic books, or should I say the woman who brought me into comic books, made a comic book woman out of me. Yeah. I had to stop the video for a moment because I was giggling way too much. Storm was the character that got me into comic books, and it was mainly the cartoon. The X-Men cartoon, I think, is how a lot of us started our love affair with the X-Men, and I remember seeing Storm. She was just so dynamic. And I don't think I really knew that it was a comic book until I marched into my local comic book store and I was like, I want to see a female character. I marched into that comic book store like I owned it. And I think the guy from behind the counter had me pegged from the moment I walked in. He was probably looking at this 12-year-old nothing little girl and thinking, free money. And he was right. Because the moment he introduced me to the X-Men comic book, I was lost. And if I were to meet this guy today, if I knew where he was, I would totally hug him. Because this guy took the time out of his day to take me to the X-Men comic book, open up it to Storm. And Storm was so amazing and dynamic with her white hair and blue eyes. The fact that she could shoot a lightning from her fingertips blew me away. And it wasn't only that. He took the time to explain to me a bit about Storm's mythology, about the X-Men, which I adored. And the more I read about Storm and the X-Men and their struggles, and seeing Storm in the head, being the leader of the X-Men team, the fact that she could square it off with Cyclops with his optic blast that could level mountains, and that she was so powerful in just her presence blew me away. And that's not to throw shade at the rest of the X-Men, because I love my girl, Jean Grey. And I appreciate my boy, Wolvie. And Cyclops, I like Cyclops. I might be in the minority, but I adore that character. I adore the X-Men on whole, but there was something about Storm. The way that she stood up and stood strong. The fact that she could face off from oppression and feel that weight still on her shoulders, yet never slump her shoulders, never give in to that weight, made me admire her. It made me admire her for the strong, confident character that she was. And it wasn't that she wasn't flawed, because there were certain aspects of her that were flawed. It was the fact that she sometimes was so stubborn and wouldn't give in, and you got it because she had to be powerful to control the storms. The weather reacted to her emotions, so she couldn't crack. But she also, that vulnerability of knowing that, she couldn't crack, but part of her wanted to give in to her feelings at time, but she just couldn't do it. That vulnerability and that strength let me love her and appreciate her even more. So this video is going to be all about Storm, and I want to take you guys on a journey. Storm's mythology starts off from the fact that she is the descendant from very powerful priestesses, an ancient lineage in Africa where they had distinct features and characteristics such as the blue eyes and white hair, beautiful dark mocha skin. You could tell that they were attached to these ancient, natural, powerful forces that gave them power, or so that was the belief within the tribe. Her mother, Nader, was someone who left her tribe following her heart, following David Monroe, an American man that she fell head over heels, madly in love with, enough to leave everything that she knows, to follow her heart, and to be by his side, which I think leans and gives a little bit to Aurora. Storm, has that passion and that love. So I think that started with her mother being brave enough to leave the tribe and go to America and follow David across the world to be with him, and then follow him back to Africa when he was called upon as a journalist to cover a war. At that time, this was no picnic. They were going to Egypt, into a war-torn state, when they had this precious little 6-month baby girl by the name of Aurora, and they had her life in their hands. And her mother, Nader, because her partner, because David, her love, believed so much as being a photojournalist, was willing to uproot this little girl and go to Cairo and to Egypt and live there and support him and have his back. And they lived in Cairo for quite some time, up until finally that conflict got the better of them, their lives, and tore them away by having a plane crash into their home when Aurora was only 6 years old. Can you imagine? 6 years old, having your parents ripped from you. Not only that, that plane crashed into their home, covered her in rubble. This 6-year-old girl, covered in rubble, buried alive to the point that she couldn't breathe, to the point where no one could hear her when she cried and she sobbed, to the point that she was alone and her mother was dead beside her, not even inches away. A terrified 6-year-old Aurora, crying out for someone to save her in the darkness, in the rubble, with no chance of seemingly surviving, until she saw her mother's amulet. And this young girl, who had no power, who is trapped, who is alone and frightened and sobbing and alone and not knowing what to do, reached out for that amulet and freed herself in traditional magical ways, of course. But that strength, another little girl wouldn't have had the strength and the gumption to take that amulet and free herself. But Storm did. And then at that point, she was on her own, frightened and alone. And she could have just curled up and just faded away. But that wasn't Storm. No, that wasn't Storm. Storm was scrappy. Storm learned how to survive. And that's what we like about Storm. We like that survivor instinct. That survivor instinct is what led her into the crosshair and sights of Ahmed, a master thief, someone who ran a gang. Somewhat like Oliver Twist. He ran a gang of pickpockets. Pickpockets who, targeted tourists and people that wouldn't originally be as savvy to their trade. And that alone is what brought her into the sphere of Professor X, who of course stopped her from pickpocketing him because, come on, let's face it, most powerful telepath dealing with his own drama in that time. But when she was a little girl, that's when she first met Professor X. He identified her brainwaves, but because he was dealing with his own drama, which we're not going to get into in this video, he let her alone for that time. And Monroe, she grew up on those streets, gaining the skills that she needed in order to survive. Because even at that tender age, Storm understood that you don't turn away the tools that are given to you. And she had adventures. I mean, even as a young girl of 12, she was stealing mystical gems that held ancient eternals like Kendra. And Kendra is, well, we'll go into that some other day. But to keep on message with Storm, she was a survivor. She was someone who took what she needed and then grew when she had to. And she grew to the point that she left those streets and she started exploring on her own. And that wasn't easy. I mean, there was even a point where she was almost raped and was forced to kill someone, barely even 12. And that's a hard lesson to learn. Storm knew herself enough back then to know that she didn't want to take lives. She was a good person, even when she was pushed to the back and didn't have a choice. She knew that that wasn't the person that she was meant to be. That person was a hero. And as a hero, she explored. She explored the Sahara. She went to Wakanda, and this was a bit of a retcon, but it's a retcon that I like. She explored Wakanda and saved T'Challa, who obviously had a mad crush on her for years and years, because how could you not? It's Storm. But she used her budding weather control powers to save his life, which was a nice little tweak in her history. And this history is important because she ended up from Wakanda into a village that worshipped her as a goddess. Now, Storm, of course, didn't learn or become a goddess right away. I mean, she was taught by Annette. Annette was someone who thought her powers were mystical in nature and helped her budding abilities, helped her learn some semblance of control. And however, even that semblance of control got her up to the prestige in this tribe to the point that they couldn't help but worship her. And of course, Storm, she basked in this. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't like to be worshipped? And she held her own. She helped them. It wasn't as if she was like, come, bring me grapes and feed me. No, she helped out that tribe because that's not Storm. Storm isn't someone who can just sit down and be worshipped all day. She has to be busy. She's a busy person. She's very proactive. So she helped them through droughts. She earned that respect and that love of that tribe. She earned the respect by doing miracles, by controlling the weather for them and making their lives generally better, to the point that it drew the interest of Xavier once again, who knew she exists, who came to her when his original 5 were kidnapped by the living island Krakoa. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but it was in giant size X-Men, like a giant size X-Men original, issue 1, where he recruited her along with my boy Wolvie and Nightcrawler, who is a complete sweetie, as well as Colossus, which is completely huggable, and Thunderbird, which I don't know that much about aside from he tragically died. Sorry, spoiler. And so we've got Colossus, Nightcrawler, Wolvie, Thunderbird